morning. Good morning. Good morning. Welcome to Criminal Justice Insider. I'm Babz Rawls.
And I'm Jeff Grant.
Oh, we are sponsored by the Community Foundation of Greater New Haven.
Now more than ever.
Hi, Jeff. How are you?
Hey, Babz. How you doing?
So we're excited today because we have former Governor John Rowland in the studio with us today.
We do. It's a big morning.
It is a big morning. People have been buzzing about this for quite some time.
Yeah, really?
Yeah.
Yeah, no.
I call it morbid curiosity.
Well, curiosity is the foundation of it. So there you go.
It's always morbid curiosity on Criminal Justice Insider.
So let's shout out our loved ones. Hey, Lynn Springer.
And Andrew Kaplan.
How are y'all?
Good.
How you doing, Jeff?
Doing real good. Babz, I'm so happy to see you. I haven't seen you since your surgery. So I just want to know that everything's okay.
All is well. I'm sitting here smiling.
Yeah.
With my hat on.
Yeah, you look you with your hat on,
because I have a hole in my head. I can't show it.
Yeah, well, those pictures on Instagram and Facebook.
All right, Jeff, let's get right into it.
I think he's stalling.
All right, so, I don't want to go into your history, Governor, because history will tell us who you were and who you are. I'm interested in who you are now and what's life like for you now, because everybody knows your story. Your story is well publicized. Who is John Rowland today?
Well, John Rowland's a grandfather now, which is very exciting. It's funny, Babz, because I spent most of my political career being the youngest of something.
Yes.
I was the youngest state rep. I was the youngest congressman. I was the youngest governor. And now I'm old. Now,
are you the youngest grandfather now?
I'm going with that. I'm going with the youngest grandfather. So a year or so ago, when I got out, this is how we say it, right, Jeff? When I got out, returning citizen, I had a couple of opportunities to, I would say, fill the boat with my pride and ego again, to get into a few things that would have been exciting, would have been pride felt, would have been financially successful, so forth and so on. But I don't know if Jeff feels the same way, but, having gone through this past experience, I'm like, this all happened for a reason. I mean, there's a purpose behind all of it.
Yeah.
And I think there's a purpose behind everything that happens in our lives. So long story short, I was all ready to jump into this venture. And I kept in the back of my mind, my wife was all excited. My kids were like, Dad, don't do it. It was high profile. Don't do it. Stay under the radar. It's too toxic out there. The press hates you, whatever. And I kept listening to my kids, and I kept thinking, you know what? They want to see their old man kind of lay low a little bit. So as it turned out, I get contacted by a friend of mine from Prison Fellowship. And for anybody under 50, Prison Fellowship was founded by, I have to say Angel Tree, because everybody knows Prison Fellowship from Angel Tree.
Yeah.
But anybody over 40 or 50 knows that Prison Fellowship started with Chuck Colson 40 years ago.
Sure.
And Chuck Colson took the fall for Watergate, went away for 7 months. And when he got out, he said, we've got to do something for all these men and women in prison. And there's nothing. There's no spiritual transformation. There's no vocational training. And we have to help these guys. And I told them I wouldn't leave them behind. And he started this ministry over 40 years ago. And it's a huge ministry. He passed about 5 years ago. No, 5 years ago he passed. He had actually approached me about 14 years ago to go into Prison Fellowship.
Wow.
And I said, no, I got bigger fish to fry, and ended up doing the radio gig up in Hartford. And so I'm now the quote-unquote development director for the Northeast, the land of the chosen frozen. And so I'm, and somehow...
We know that, Babz.
Yeah, it's true. It is. It's the land of... So when they said, we want you to do the Northeast, I said, well, nobody knows you guys up here. They said, exactly.
Yeah.
And so I not only Northeast, so I've got all of New England, New York, Ohio, and Pennsylvania. So I'm promoting Prison Fellowship, fundraising, and frankly, we're trying to get into more prisons in Connecticut, where we run our programs. It's a 1 year commitment, and it's Bible study, it's Celebrate Recovery, which is AA on faith steroids, and we do Ramsey's Financial Peace, and we do all kinds of training programs, fatherhood initiatives, and it's a 1 year commitment. And ideally, we get our folks into the prisons, all state prisons, and we get them in there for a year. The inmates commit for a year. Ideally, if we can segregate our participants from the rest of the prison population, we really have a real command focus on these men and women. And after a year, they graduate, they get diplomas and so forth. But more importantly, we then hand them off to aftercare programs, whether it's church, Celebrate Recovery, other aftercare.
So are you finding it hard? I mean, Prison Fellowship is a pretty conservative Christian organization.
Absolutely.
It's a ministry.
Yeah, no question.
It's a ministry. And the Northeast is pretty progressive generally. I mean, that's not true everywhere, but the churches and synagogues and mosques are pretty progressive. So how do you reconcile that? How do you deal with that?
That's a great question. And I would tell you, 40 years ago, we couldn't get into a prison in the Northeast. And I would say 40 years ago, the whole mindset, or even 20 years ago, the whole mindset of criminal justice and, lock them up, throw away the keys, 3 strikes, you're out, mandatory minimum sentences, the list goes on. But also, 20 years ago, no one wanted God in the prisons and, separation of church and state.
Sure.
So having said all that, the sands have shifted dramatically. I mean, here in Connecticut, criminal justice reform, Scott Semple, the commissioner, DOC, spectacular guy. I've known him for 40 years.
And we've got a new guy who's cut
from Utah, same cloth.
He's cut from the same cloth.
And they've both been here, by the way.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I mean, we're really blessed.
Roland Clark.
Yeah.
Right.
Roland, potato, tomato.
We're getting confused with the Roland and the Rollin.
It doesn't matter. Just take a swing at it. So to answer your question, Jeff, we're finding great reception, more so than ever before at Rikers Island, for example,
sure,
in New York. And so we're getting tremendous traction outside of Boston, Connecticut, New York. New England states, upper states are a little bit harder. Ohio and Pennsylvania are opening up. So to your point, it was hard to get into the Department of Corrections. It was hard, they didn't want any faith-based stuff, and everybody's mellowing out. Everybody gets it. Everybody is really focusing on returning citizens. When Chuck Colson started his ministry 40 years ago, there were 420,000 inmates in the entire country. As you both know, there's now 2.3 million inmates, and 30% of the people in this country have some kind of a record. 30% of America, has a record. So the world has changed, and I think the mindset of, let's get them off the streets, which was huge in the 1990s because of the gang situations and things going on in Connecticut and across the country. That's shifted dramatically. You got the First Step Act. You've got a lot of coalitions between like the Koch brothers and the ACLU and everybody's. The line I used, I was giving a speech a few weeks ago, and I said, we know how to be tough on crime. Now we have to be smart on crime. So with that, I think people are starting to get it, and there's a lot of changes taking place.
Go ahead, Babz.
So when you say that, do you say that because your experiences have brought you to this place? Because before that, did you have some awareness about what was happening in the criminal justice communities?
I would say that I was on that boat with everybody else in the 90s, and that was, oh my gosh, the gangs have taken over our streets. It was a huge problem, especially in the urban communities, and it was out of sight, out of mind, and so that's how 3 strikes, you're out came about. That's how the mandatory minimums came about, and so I would say that I think at that time, politically and otherwise, everybody just wanted anybody that even thought of a crime just out of the way, out of sight. And I think now, again, the population's increased so dramatically. Now you have, obviously with the recidivism rate of 67%, 70%, you can pretty much work the numbers any way you want. And also the fact that the drug and alcohol issue is so dominant in the prison population. And so I think people are starting to say, okay, wait a minute now. 60,000 people a month or a week, whatever the numbers are, come back to our communities. And so now even, Jeff, you mentioned, even the churches and the synagogues and the mosques are starting to realize, oh, I guess we should bring these people into our churches, right? I guess we should have them in the front pews. I guess we should bring them in to Celebrate Recovery, which is a key, kind of a new program. So I think people are starting to wake up and recognize and realize that returning citizens, if we want to have a quality of life for ourselves, our kids, and their kids, and that's the other issue, that generation, the number of children of incarcerated male and females that go to prison is unbelievable, unbelievable number.
So, John, your administration, so I guess it was 10 years or so you were governor, is that about right?
Yes, 94 to 04.
Yeah. So
you voted for me, right? No, you were probably in Rye, New York.
I was living in New York at the time.
Well,
but I would have voted.
You could have voted after.
I would have voted. So, but it seems that it was tumultuous times, and there were a lot of contrasting things that were the hallmarks of your administration. A lot of social reform, and at the same time, it was tougher on crime. We had Mike Lawler in here not that long ago, and I think he was a huge proponent for earlier releases and more compassionate criminal justice. So I think that there were a lot of things going on back then. How do you reconcile, even politically, the fact that some things got more socially aware, but some things potentially less?
Well, I think there's no question that certainly back in the 90s, the entire country, and whether it didn't matter who the president was, whether the Democrats controlled the House or the Senate, there was really no criminal justice reform going on anywhere in the country, because at that point, and sans shift, at that point, there were so many drug issues and gang-related issues that everybody was just, you couldn't be tough enough on crime back in the day. Everybody remembers Michael Dukakis literally losing the presidential race over that kind of an issue. So there was a fear and a misunderstanding of what we're going to do when people return from prison.
Well, he lost that race because it was a bad
Willie Horton ad.
It was the Willie Horton, which was not true. Which was,
I don't even remember all the issues, but it was bad.
I mean, it was bad, but
Yeah.
And I think that was the beginning of opening the door to
Absolutely
to incivility in campaigning. I mean, I think. Listen, when you look at the history of campaigning, there's a whole lot of incivility, but I think that's the first time in our real consciousness that we saw this kind of blowback that was racially charged and scared white folks to the point where it drove them to the polls to sort of say, Dukakis is going to allow rapists and murderers to get at us, and we can't have that.
No, there's no question it was a defining moment, and I think it chilled a lot of people in a lot of different ways in politics and so forth. But I think the realization when you see the number of people incarcerated, when you see the impact on the community, and don't forget the whole drug war. I mean, back then, part of the drug war was, we treated crack differently than cocaine. We had,
and that was race
sentencing.
based.
Absolutely.
I mean, that was race based, and,
No question.
and that's why it was treated differently.
No question.
But John, what about political expediency back then, or what was necessary as a politician, as opposed to being authentic, what you really felt? Or, I mean, what was the conflict going on there, and how have you kind of resolved it now?
There really wasn't any conflict. When you're in the political world, you're taking the stuff as it's coming your way. And I used to always say that the legislature doesn't act on any legislation unless it's been in the front page of a newspaper for 3 days in a row. Once that's occurred, then they're going to resolve the issue. Then we're going to, pass new laws. We're going to, get rid of, plastic straws, whatever the issue is. And it's a reactive body. And I've been in the political business my whole life, and I can tell you from observations in Connecticut and in Washington, and that is that once public opinion has been piqued, once the press has been focused on something, then, because otherwise it doesn't get any attention. I mean,
and that's you make a good point. I mean, because I was elected to the Board of Aldermen here, then before that I served on the Board of Police Commissioners, and you're absolutely right that politics is legislating is a reaction
100%
reactionary life. There's no getting ahead of things. There's no getting it out on front beforehand. It is what's in the headlines, and we have to deal with it because our constituents read the papers, listen to the news, and then they call.
And what do legislators do? They legislate. They pass laws. No one's getting rid of laws. I used to always say we should have a session up in Hartford. The first year should be getting rid of the bad and stupid laws, and the next year should be doing new laws.
Yeah, clean the swamp.
Yeah.
Clean the swamp.
I mean, it's absolutely correct. And right, wrong, or indifferent, that's where the energy and the resources go, and that's where the public opinion is driven. And so, having said all that, I think now people are the returning citizen issue is huge because we're seeing it everywhere. So what's happened? Well, you go into a halfway house now and you'll see big charts of companies that are willing to hire people. Where I'm working with a bunch of churches that are meeting together, trying to discuss how they can bring returning citizens into their churches, because there's some fear there. I mean, there's a lot of issues and a lot of concerns, and they've not done a good job doing that, and now they're trying to figure out how to do that. So you have a lot of people recognizing and realizing that if you don't start to give these people a second chance. By the way, April is Second Chance Month.
Oh,
As passed.
Okay.
Yes, the White House has declared that
this White House.
This. Oh no! Hold on a second.
No,
this White House passed the First Step Act as well, and pushed through a bipartisan piece of legislation to do something in the federal prisons.
Is there any money attached to that?
Absolutely, a lot of money. For example, there's like $250 million attached to vocational and educational training in the federal prisons. This First Step Act is all about the federal prisons.
I'm not a fan of this administration.
I guess that.
So
yeah.
it's gonna be very difficult for me to like high five them on anything other than seeing them leave.
Well, the irony is that they're the first administration to really do something on this. I mean,
okay.
Yeah,
all right. Okay.
Just do some homework on. I'm not promoting one guy or the other. I mean, for whatever the motivation was.
You are a Republican,
and it really is Jared Kushner that's driven this boat. And there's a coalition. It's the ACLU, it's the Koch brothers, it's the Heritage Foundation, and it's the NAACP have coalesced. Those are the 4 or 5 major and Prison Fellowship. Those are the major coalitions that have come together to pass the First Step Act. And
so now, do you feel comfortable with this Republican Party as it is? Because this is not the Republican Party that you grew up through. You can't. Can you?
Well, I don't recognize either party.
Okay.
I don't recognize this Republican Party, and I don't recognize the Democrat Party.
Really?
I grew up in Waterbury, which is like 5-1 Democrat to Republican, and the Democrat Party that I saw and grew up with for the last 50 years is not the one that's there now, and the Republican Party that I grew up with, all 10 of us in Waterbury, is not the one that I see now. So they both changed. You don't think the Democrat Party's changed? It has.
It's like you do have a building on the green there, John, with your name on it.
Yes. Rolling family governments. But so my point is that things have changed dramatically, and I used to spend a lot of time in schools encouraging kids to go into politics, but I think everybody should take a breath and rethink whether you want to get involved. Locally is the way to go. I mean, if you really want to have an impact and a difference, I think you can do more on the local board of education than you probably can in Congress these days.
I know, but you know what? These board of educations are looking like Congress these days. They're very contentious all over the place, and it's quite challenging. I mean, particularly here in New Haven, our board of education mirrors Congress, I think, with the level of vitriol that comes out of every meeting.
That's everywhere.
That's
the zoning
what I mean.
boards. It's everywhere.
It's everywhere.
It's the spiritual warfare that's going on in this country right now.
Okay, I'll grant you that, because I think there needs to be a return to some kind of modicum of civility that has been lacking. I mean, on both sides. This is not even a Democrat Republican thing, although I think Republicans deal it out much more sophisticated than most. I do think, though, that there is this. I think reality show mentality on how we treat each other has spilled over into our everyday practical lives and in how we legislate. Just like, for example, people like CSI, and they think that crimes ought to be solved in the same fashion as CSI crimes. CSI is fictional television, but people believe it so much that they expect that kind of criminal fighting, crime fighting. So the same is to be said for when we watch these reality shows. People think that they can say and do whatever they want without regard to respecting people's humanity all the time. From the guy who is just doing the parking meeting, just doing his job, and people are attacking him because your meter ran out and now you want to beat him up. And this just happened here in New Haven. So, there's this air of vitriol that the meanness that I haven't seen in a very long time.
Well, I would recommend to all of your listeners to read.
Yeah, show it to the camera.
Oh, there you go. Oh, yeah. I'm not used to.
Yeah, you got it.
You're here.
Okay.
Yeah, right there.
Chuck Colson's Born Again. He wrote this book 43 years ago.
Yeah.
It's a great book, and I I'm going to give this to you, Jeff, and you can share it with Babz as well.
Oh, you didn't bring me one?
I only brought one. I didn't know what the setup was. So, but you guys can share. I think you share well. You get along and share well. And in his introduction, he has a great line. He says, "And my most sincere and humble prayer now in this time of judgment is for the revival of the flagging national spirit. It's coming only one way, as each of us bows in submission to him, and as the Almighty leads us from darkness into light, so that once again we can stand together, truly one nation under God." Now, that was in 1975 that Colson said that. He was talking about the nation really suffering, and this was right after Watergate, by the way.
Yeah,
He took the fall for Watergate. So that's what he was saying in 75, and here we are, 44 years later, and we're still, a mess. But that's part of our society. These are the kind of the bumps and the bruises we go through, the cycles we go through. Whether we're going to come out of the cycle or not, I don't know. But I think what's also happening is that people are kind of shutting out the whole political process, and they're saying, okay, what can I do? And that's why, for me, to go to prison fellowship and to work with this ministry and to go into prisons and try to help people and to raise the funds in the organization, it's a retail business. I mean, trying to help a handful of people, one person. I counsel and mentor quite a few folks, and there's some times I'm thinking, oh, this is a waste of my time, but I'm like, if I can just help that one person get through this tunnel that they're in right now, the impact that it has on his family and others is immense. So having said all that, I think we've seen a time in society where, let's say the churches for the last 40 years have stepped down from a lot of their responsibilities in the community and they're doing a lot of things, from housing people to taking care of people to helping them get jobs. The old ethnic New Haven Waterburys were very much set up in ethnic groups and neighborhoods, and we kind of took care of each other in the churches, the mosques, the synagogues, and the churches have fallen in that involvement. And to answer your question about why things are going so crazy, it's the family unit. I mean, there's not a lot of personal responsibility, and so as the churches and families diminish their roles in people's lives, government becomes bigger and stronger and more dominant. So that shift has taken place certainly in our cities over the last 40 years.
Well, John, I know that it's not rhetoric when you say that you're reaching out to people individually. That we have a ministry that supports white-collar criminals and their families, and we have a support group on Monday nights. And one of the reasons I reached out to you for the show is not just because, obviously, of your history and your name brand as former governor and all of that, but in talking to someone and helping someone, they told me that in preparing for prison that you came over their house. And I thought that was remarkable, because that all goes on in secret. I mean, that's private.
Right.
And there's no cameras there. There's no leverage for that. That's just helping people one-on-one. And he told me about that. And actually, after the air, I'll talk to you about that.
Sure.
But I just think that's remarkable that you could go from being so big, such a name brand, and such a big rise and such a big fall, to actually going over individuals' houses who are suffering in the evening.
Well, it's I've been doing it for a long time, and what's interesting is that not a lot of people can tell these poor men and women what they're about to go through. And you've been through it, so you know. So
I've been through it too.
And you've been through. Okay, I didn't know that.
Don't leave Babz out.
Oh, okay, I didn't know. So you know that. I mean, there's so much anxiety and fear and so forth. So I have a lot of lawyers and even judges that have contacted me and said, "Hey, can you go see somebody?" And what I generally like to do is I like to see the person that's going away, one-on-one, and then I usually will come back and meet with the spouse and kids, and the kids as well.
I've done that work too,
and try to relieve their anxiety and what they're about to go through. So, and they're going to get through it. But I guess I'm going to narrow this down to one word, and the word is hope. Because one of the things I found when I was incarcerated is I looked around that room day after day, and I saw hopelessness. People, men and women in the visiting room, whatever, they lack hope. I mean, they have no hope when they go home, and you really count your blessings, and I think both of you can agree when you know what you have to go home to, you know, family and spouses and grandkids and all, you know, finances and friends, and you look around and you know these guys are going to spend about a year trying to figure out how to get their driver's license back.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've done a lot of work in aftercare as well, and it's just amazing to see, you know, they don't have a high school diploma, they're probably drug addicted, they've got no finances, no family to go back to, nowhere to live, and they don't even have a driver's license. So what are the chances of that person going back into a life of crime? Well, it's probably 70 or 80%. So that's why with prison fellowship, at least if we can get an anchor of spiritual transformation and get that person to start to realize that, hey, there's a different way, and they can give their life to the Lord, and they can have an opportunity to start fresh, you know, second chance, whatever terminology you want to use, and that's the real service to the Lord, to do something like that.
So did you discover this the first time or the second time?
I've been doing this for a dozen years. So Pastor Will Maratti brought me to the Lord in 2002, and that was before I left office and before everything went south. So he had a huge impact on my life, and you know, we began to do a lot back in 2002, and then of course I resigned office in 2004, and then went through the roller coaster over the last.
And how much
years.
time did you serve the first time?
10 months.
Okay, and then the second time you served?
15 months.
Okay.
So what's it like? Where did you serve the first time?
Loretto.
In Pennsylvania?
Correct.
So what's it like to walk? Was that a camp or was it a
camp?
It was a camp.
Both were camps.
So what's it like to walk in there and you're a former governor and people read the papers, so they, you know, there's no one who doesn't know you even in the prison.
Jeff, they closed the prison down. Before I got there, Channel 8, all the newspapers were there.
Oh, they took the ride?
Oh, 9 hours away.
They
took the ride. Don't underestimate the intrigue and interest of the press. No, they were all there.
Yeah,
there were dozens of them. And long story short, I just drove past them around the building and walked in, and they didn't see me, so they're very disappointed.
Yeah.
My friend who had dropped me off was driving out, and the press circled his car, wouldn't let him drive out.
And you're like, he's not here.
And they were trying to talk to him.
Who drove you to prison?
A friend of mine.
But
okay.
Not your family, right?
No, never have the family. I always tell people, never have the family. No, that's a huge mistake.
Yeah, because it's too much.
Now, when I counsel people, I say, do not, you know, a couple things I tell them. One of them is don't have your family. So what they did was the guy from the High for Current called my friend at work about 5 hours later and said,
the one who drove you.
Yeah, called my friend, the one who drove me.
Yeah.
Called him at work. So you're wondering, how did he know where you work? They took a picture of his parking permit. And they traced it.
Wow. Investigative reporting.
Figured out where he worked, called him up and said, we want to talk to you. If you don't talk to us, we're going to call your boss and tell him that you're hanging around with this terrible felon and that you dropped him off at prison and that blah, 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 and all these other things. So they want to know, you know, what did he have for breakfast? You know, where'd you stay the day before? You know, really stupid things. But nonetheless, they really harassed this poor guy. And it shook him up.
So what was your first night like? Do you remember that?
No,
the very first night?
No, it wasn't, you know, nothing. It wasn't a big deal.
No. And so when you're there, because I remember everything, but I don't think about it anymore because it's been a decade. So I don't think about it like I used to think about it. But so what was the most stunning thing that you gained from that time, your first time?
Well, twofold. One was how blessed I was to have my family and friends staying behind me and being there.
Yeah, because that makes a huge difference.
It's a huge difference. I mean, because getting back to what I said a few moments ago, you look around that room and you know 95% of these guys have nothing. They've got nothing to go back to. I mean, we're talking no house, nobody's married. If you're married, they're already divorced. Kids, who knows where they are, no finances, resources. So you really appreciate what you have in your life. And as you both know, your life and your world becomes very small.
Yes.
You know, and there's a lot of things you can't connect with and work and worry about. So it's hard. I mean, it's harder, obviously, on our families than it is on us because all the pressures and responsibilities are on them.
And so when you find yourself about to do this for the second time, what's your thoughts? How did you feel? What was that moment, those moments like?
So again, it's you look at the motivation, and when this first started to occur a few years ago, my lawyer went down to meet with the prosecutors, and they said, your guy didn't do enough time 10 years ago. We're going to get him.
Mm.
I'm like, okay, this is going to be a problem. And it took them about a year or so to put stuff together. And then you look back over your shoulder, figuring out what the motivation was, and you see that the guy that went after you, before you've even gotten down the steps of the courthouse, he's running for governor. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Well, that explains a lot.
Mm.
He had gone after a couple of Democrats, and he needed to beef up his meal ticket, and so that's why he went after me. So you understand that motivation. So once you understand that, one of the things I always counsel people on before they go away is to leave bitterness behind.
Mm-hmm.
And you think to yourself, well, why is that a big deal? If you go into that facility and you're bitter and you're mad and you're angry, you're the only one's going to suffer from that.
Mm-hmm.
Matter of fact, it's going to be like a cancer eating you away. So I'm always telling people, turn the other cheek, drop the bitterness, whatever animosity you have towards others, start to work on yourself.
Mm-hmm.
This is a great opportunity that God has given you to kind of say, okay, time to reset the button. And so again, it gets back to, we talk about this in prison fellowship a lot when we're working with prisoners, and it's to bring them hope.
Mm-hmm.
And we think that the only way to get that hope is through spiritual transformation. That's why we do heavy Bible study. We do a lot of, the whole self-analyzing of their lives and so forth, and to kind of bring them out of that. So when we're successful and these guys come out, the chances of them going back are reduced significantly.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, nobody's going to wake up on a Tuesday after they got out of prison and say, hey, I'm going to change my life. I'm going to go work at Home Depot and everything's going to be great. If they use that time to transform themselves and find the Lord, realize that there's something bigger and more important than themselves, they got a shot.
So did you have opportunity to apologize or be sorry? Do you feel sorry? Do you feel sorry for whatever you were charged with or whatever? Do you know what I mean? Like, do you?
Well, here,
because I know people want to make you sorry. I know people want to hear you say, because we've had this conversation with Mayor Ganim, same conversation,
right?
And he said,
so
I'm done saying sorry. I've said sorry everywhere I went.
Let me ask you this: for whatever you've been charged with.
Mm-hmm.
So my nickel bets, you can't even come close to suggesting what I've been charged with.
The second time or the first time?
Either time.
Second time.
I'm going to ask Babz. You might know because you're paying attention to it.
I probably know.
But the point of saying that is that a lot of times things get trumped up and there's motivations and purposes behind it, and the motivations and purposes behind what these guys did to me you'd be hard pressed to see if anybody ever went to prison for these charges.
Well, John, I think that anybody
or any victims or anybody hurt or anything else.
Mm-hmm.
But anybody who goes through the system, no matter whether it's a white collar crime or an inner city crime or violent crime or whatever, in some respects they know that they're a political refugee. I mean that it's set up for winners and losers, and they've shown weakness, or that there's been other political motivations behind laws that they're being accused of. And this is a conversation that has to happen in order for people to reconcile what's happened with them, but that doesn't relieve them necessarily of their responsibility and of their need to show remorse and forgiveness and ask for forgiveness. And so, like, where are you in that spectrum?
Well, let me put it this way. If I felt that I did something wrong and I'd asked for forgiveness, and I would have done a plea deal.
Mm-hmm.
But I went to court and I fought it. I went to appeals. The law firms even came in and did all this stuff pro bono. I mean, if they did it pro bono, there must be a reason behind it. They took it to the Supreme Court.
Mm.
So here's if you look at the criminal justice system, it is fragmented. As you know, that there's things that take place in the urban communities, but the political motivations that are now coming out are much worse than they were a million years ago. And I say this because if you think you're safe, look at what's happening. And I know you don't like the president, but
like is nice.
Oh yeah, okay, all right. Well, let me say this. So here he is, the most powerful person in the planet, arguably, right? Whether you like him or not. A couple of prosecutors have decided they're going to go after him, and they spent 2 years. But here's what's interesting. Can you pursue another human being or another law-abiding citizen if there's no evidence that a crime has been committed?
I'm sorry, what?
Can you? I'm just listen. We can argue.
Governor.
We can argue. You can argue. There was no evidence that he committed any crime. Yet he's been investigated. For
we don't
2
know
years.
that. We don't have the Mueller report. We have Barr's interpretation.
I'm not going there.
Okay.
Listen, if they had something, they would have indicted.
But you do know.
My point is that the motivation to start the investigation, there was no blatant evidence of a crime that had been committed. So my point is, leave the politics alone for a second. If prosecutors can go after the president of the United States and torture him and his family and his friends, Jeff, this is my point. Imagine what they can do to ordinary citizens.
Oh, we know.
Right. That's my point.
Forget
the
we all
politics
know.
of it.
I'm sorry. As the only person of color in this room, I just find that whole statement upside down.
It has nothing to do with color. And what I'm suggesting is that when prosecutors decide that they're going to pursue somebody.
You know, there were just 2 men who got out of
prison.
prison who served 42 years for a crime they didn't commit. There's a whole bunch of those brothers in prison who are serving time for crimes that they commit.
Or have been given too much time.
All right, so how about this? Let me change this up a little bit. So if you had to advise the governor, the current governor, Governor Lamont, what would you say to him if he called you up and said, you know what, John, I'm seeking some advice how to be in this job because he's new. It's not even a year. It's only a few months. What would be the first thing you'd say to him?
Well, if he was seeking my advice, I would be giving it to him personally.
Mm-hmm.
Wouldn't be doing it on a radio show.
Sure.
Absolutely.
And so if he called me and we had a discussion, I'd be glad to give him my advice and my thoughts about things. But I'm not going to do it here, and I'm not doing this political stuff. But I would say that this is a very challenging time for anybody in politics.
Mm-hmm.
And the Me Too movement, you're watching what's going on at the national scene. It's really rough. I mean, there's going to be a time when people are going to say, okay, how far back can we go to analyze a person's integrity, their abilities? Is it high school? Is it college? Are we going to be, how are we judged? And
I mean, if you wore a blackface in college, that's challenging to me.
Absolutely.
If you put your hands on a girl in high school or college, that's challenging. I'd want to know that if you're running for office.
Right. So that's my point. Those are new rules. Those weren't rules that were used 10 years ago. Nobody was looking up high school yearbook pictures. I actually take that back. They did do my high school yearbook picture. But the point is that we're reaching back. And so we're going to be in a system now where people probably are going to be afraid to get into the business.
Well, Stacey Abrams made a good point the other. Stacey Abrams, who lost her Senate seat in Georgia and is contemplating a presidential run. Sister, black woman, narrowly almost beat the elected governor now. So she made this point about that we can't seek perfection in these offices. Like we can't seek people to be perfect. What we ought to do is listen to how they respond, and if they apologize, and then move forward with a different set of experiences. Do you know what I mean? Like, if you've done some things and you're sorry for it, and you say that, and then you move in a different direction, then that's what we ought to measure, instead of using what has happened as the whipping stick forever. And that speaks to me about what happens to people who come out of prison.
But
like, how long can they use your time served against you as some kind of character?
So here there's two problems that I see in society right now. A, there's no due process. That's out the window. Once an accusation's been made, it's over. I mean, whether it's true, false, partially true, whatever, those days are gone. And the second problem, I think, is that we like to think that if you just say, like, for example, Joe Biden's going through it right now. Great example.
Mm-hmm.
So he did some video thing yesterday, and I saw little bits and pieces of it. I'll be more thoughtful. But he didn't apologize. So that they're going to chase him on that for the next couple of days. So that might be correct that society wants you to do that if they're going to give you a second chance. Eddie Perez just announced for mayor 2 days ago, or yesterday, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And so the first thing he did was ask, to apologize and so forth as part of it. So the good news is that American society loves a comeback story. They do love. We are a country of second chances, and we just have to make sure that those second chances are spread evenly. And people that have been incarcerated trying to get jobs. I mean, it's painful to see what these men and women have to go through. And we don't have to check off the box here, and we're making some changes, I think, across the country, but we still have a long way to go.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well, we say we're a country of second chances, but the reality is that we're somewhere in the middle of this awareness of the things that we've done right and wrong, and now societally we're paying for a lot of the decisions we made. The scale of criminal justice, for example, and why we have these problems, and are we really dedicating enough resources to people's second chances? I think that's a big question mark, and certainly we haven't seen we haven't seen the kind of opportunities we would like to see for people coming out of prison, and the acceptance in society, and the kind of jobs or anything else. I mean, people are suffering out there.
No question. And one of the things, it's interesting because in prison fellowship, we always talk about whether we should be doing more stuff in aftercare. And we've come to the conclusion that we do this really well, where we have people that have time on their hands and have an opportunity. Because as you both know, there's no rehabilitation in prisons. That's a joke. That's not happening. So at least if you could have spiritual rehabilitation, we have a shot.
Mm-hmm.
Then the aftercare is key, and we're seeing. I don't know. I think you're seeing it as well. There are more "quote unquote" programs out there. People, whether it's state funded or city funded or federally funded, but you still have to find that employer that's willing to hire you.
Yeah,
and that's the real dilemma. That's the real issue. And for guys, returning citizens that have violence or other significant issues in their background, they got a real challenge.
Yeah, they got a real challenge.
They got a real challenge. So here's, I think, to give you the spectrum of how our society has changed, especially in this part of the country. We were sending guys away for 10 or 15 years for the conspiracy to sell marijuana.
Mm-hmm.
And as we know, it wasn't just selling the marijuana. The government's been smart enough to figure out if you get 3 people involved, you get charged with conspiracy. Mm-hmm. And now you're going to go away for 10 or 15 years, and especially on the federal side. So we're sending these guys away for 10 or 15 years for selling marijuana. They don't, they went away at age 22. They're coming back at age 42. What are the chances of them having anything left of a family, whatever. So the spectrum of that move to now will probably be legalizing marijuana in most of the states in the Northeast.
And what do you think should happen to those folks who, should their records be expunged? Should that all be wiped away? Because now we're about to make marijuana legal.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think that everybody should have a fresh start and a second opportunity. The point is that society has changed dramatically over those 30 years. And by the way, I don't think we should legalize marijuana either. I think that's really stupid. Mm-hmm. What good can happen from that? Mm-hmm. What good can happen from legalizing marijuana?
Well, do you think because it'll stop the criminalization?
Well, decriminalization and legalizing it are, there's two different things. Mm-hmm. And by legalizing it, and I know the only reason they want to do it is to get the revenue. Mm-hmm. But do we want people impacted mentally? We know it's addictive, and frankly, today's marijuana is not the marijuana that we all saw 40 years ago. It certainly is not even comparable. And again, I drive the point. Here we are. Everybody's kind of sitting back, letting this happen. We lost a child to a drug overdose, so we've lived this. Mm-hmm. So we've lived this. I have some experience in this and some personal knowledge. But my point is that as a society, we're all just kind of hanging back and letting the legislators do what they want. And I don't know what the purpose is.
Well, I mean, I think even if marijuana is legalized, business will say, you still can't come to work high. I mean, you still can't.
Good luck with that.
You can't be on the job you know, because they'll drug. I mean, they're, you know, I mean, I know for a fact Metro North MTA drug tests randomly, consistently,
as they should.
You know,
Right.
as they should.
Yeah.
And I'm sure folks who drive, but you know, folks who are in positions and jobs that are public, are in the public and public transportation and the moving of people and dealing. Like, I don't want my dentist to be high, right? I don't.
Then you have to be against legalizing marijuana.
You know,
right?
I don't know. I think there's
we
a
don't
way
want
to
we
sort
don't want
of.
them drunk either.
We don't.
Right.
Nobody's saying like, you know.
But-
I mean,
but-
well, we've said that, and
You know, and a lot of people, oh, well, you know, everybody says it's a gateway drug, you know, blah, blah, blah. Well, well, I would say that not everybody that smokes pot becomes a heroin addict.
right.
But you can bet that a huge percentage of people that become heroin addicts did start with alcohol and pot. No question. No question. We can debate whether it's 80%, 90%, whatever.
Well, we don't have time to debate it. So.
No. Let me circle back to the first question, and the first question is why?
Mhm.
What good comes from legalizing marijuana? What good? What good thing is going to happen tomorrow morning if we legalize marijuana?
So people
Are
are asking this question, y'all. I need y'all to go. Do you have a Facebook page?
No, I don't do Facebook.
I can send people to your Facebook page, and you could debate this all out.
I don't need to debate. I'm not in politics anymore. I'm retired.
I'm sober 16 years. I don't even know what this new marijuana is.
Wow.
So anybody that's gone through being sober, I mean, so why do we want to then say, okay, it's legalized, but you can't use it. Maybe you can use it. Private employers. It just sends the wrong message. And so we want to tell our children, hey, we don't want you to do anything unhealthy, but we're going to legalize marijuana in the state. What kind of a message does it?
You know, but people drink all the time.
It has nothing to do with drinking. Drinking is a socially accepted.
But it wasn't always. You remember Prohibition?
I understand, but there's a huge. People don't get up in the morning and say, I'm going to have a shot and a beer unless they have some addiction issues. People will get up and say, I'm going to smoke a joint on the way to work, or I'm going to smoke one at noon, and it's why go there?
Mm-hmm. You know, it has been a pleasure having you on today.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So I'm going to give out my email because if somebody wants to contact me about prison fellowship, John_Rowland, ROWLAND, at PFM, which is prisonfellowshipministry.org. So if people want more information, if they have issues that they want to get involved, we're always looking for volunteers for Angel Tree and churches and getting people involved in going into the prisons. My job is to kind of bring that all together, to get the volunteers, the donors, the prisons opened, and get people to go in and do Celebrate Recovery.
So, you can shout out the people down there if you want. James Ackerman and Pat Nolan and Emily Colson, whoever you want to shout out. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just going to say James Ackerman is our CEO, and he actually brought Celebrate Recovery into our partnership, which to me is the fundamental key foundation of prison fellowship is to get people on that recovery mode, and then of course get them into Celebrate Recovery when they get out, which is key. Angel Tree is another huge program. We served probably 180,000 kids last year. But the real emphasis of Angel Tree is to get the families to connect with a church or a synagogue or a mosque and get them to start their spiritual transformation or to help them to, reconnect with their loved one. That's reconnecting with the loved one is probably the biggest issue that we try to focus on with these guys.
So when it's all said and done, what do you want people to remember or say about you, John Rowland?
Well, when it's all said and done, I'm more concerned about what my kids and my grandkids have to say about it. I'm not trying to affect public opinion. I'm not running for office. People are going to have their own opinions. People already do. And right, wrong, or indifferent. I mean, I walk through the store and 10 people will say, I wish you were still in. And I'm sure there's another 10 people that wish I wasn't and won't say it. But so I frankly, I don't really care. And I just want to give something back and help as many people as I can, and to serve the Lord and to be a good dad, a good husband, and a good grandfather.
Thank you for your time today. I appreciate you. Thank you, Jeff.
Babz, another wonderful show, so thank you.
Thank you, Community Foundation of Greater New Haven.
Now more than ever.
Thank you, Lynn Springer.
And Andrew Kaplan.
We'll be back in a couple of weeks.
Love you, Babz.
Thank you. Love you, too. Thank you, Harry. Bye.